Even Biden now has been forced to slightly shift his rhetoric.
Yeah. So it was hard to know what to make of this, but let's hear Biden on a possible policy shift.
Aid to Israel, Mr. President. Pardon me? Did you threaten to stop military aid to Israel? I asked them to do what they're doing. Are you abandoning Israel? What do you stop, man? Are you abandoning Israel?
I mean, there's so many layers there. What is your take on his comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not an example of what I was just talking about, because he said, I asked Israel to do what they're doing. So he's actually reaffirming support for the genocide there. But there have been other comments from people like John Kirby saying that at the White House that we've told them that unless we see changes, we're gonna have to, rethink our support. And, Biden did call Netanyahu, and just even the threat of possibly using U.S. leverage got Netanyahu to open up the land crossing that he's been blocking for months, which was confirmation of two things. One, that Israel's been deliberately blocking aid. Not that we needed the confirmation, but it was just more evidence of it. And B, that Biden's fully complicit in that, 100%. Because if it just takes one phone call to Netanyahu to get Netanyahu to finally let in hundreds of aid trucks that he's been blocking, it shows that Biden could have gotten that done months ago. He's been taking part in the siege of Gaza. And meanwhile, let me play this clip. This is Mike Johnson. This is the Republican, quote unquote, opposition, who, like, their line is that Biden is now being
abandoning.
He's abandoning Israel, which is just so laughable.
With regard to Israel, it's not just the border. It's Democrats are weak on Israel as well, and it's their support for Israel. It's rather stunning to us that there's this dramatic shift. Hamas is holding more than 130 hostages, as you know, including Americans, and these people are languishing at the hands of barbaric terrorists, and Joe Biden is, meanwhile, giving ultimatums to Israel, not Hamas. And shamefully, since October 7th, Joe Biden has transformed into an anti-Israel president. There's really no other way to characterize it. He's more concerned, seemingly, with placating the anti-Semitism in his base than standing with our historic and vitally important ally. And it's not just the White House. No one has forgotten, of course, that Chuck Schumer did the unthinkable by opining on and meddling in Israel's elected leadership. I mean, it's just, these are unthinkable developments. And it's shocking to us, but it continues. Just days ago, over 50 House Democrats called for Biden to withhold arms transfers to Israel. It's wrong, and it's dangerous, and it shows the Democrats are losing their moral clarity.
I mean, Mike Johnson's kind of campaigning for Democrats there, for all the people who have been voting uncommitted because of Biden's support for the genocide. He's making the case that Republicans would be even more pro-genocide. I mean, which is hard to imagine, but he's somehow finding a way to make that possible.
Well, it's it's nice to hear Sheldon Adelson speak from beyond the grave in the form of Where's Waldo? I mean, another Christian Zionist tool of Israel. He's the Speaker of the House. I don't even know. I mean, Republican support for Israel is slipping. It's gone down 10 points in the latest, I think it's a Pew poll. It shows support for Israel at 18% for Democrats. So yeah, it would be amazing if it were true what Mike Johnson was saying about Biden being an anti-Israel president at a time when most Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi signed on to that letter that Mike Johnson mentioned. Nancy Pelosi, who accused the protesters, the Palestine Solidarity protesters outside her home, of being controlled by Russia and China. Nancy Pelosi has signed on a letter calling for U.S. to condition military aid to Israel on a ceasefire, on ending this slaughter. So
she said people who call for a ceasefire, she said that's Putin's position, literally.
Right.
So Nancy Pelosi has officially endorsed Putin's position, and she said people who support that might be being paid by Putin. So maybe we need to investigate Nancy Pelosi for being on Russia's payroll, because that's what she also, I mean, it's just unbelievable. She said that she also wanted the FBI to investigate pro ceasefire protesters for being paid by Russia. So maybe she should include herself on that target list.
Yeah, all roads lead to Putin.
All roads lead to Putin.
We've also seen we're hearing conflicting messages from the administration. I mean, publicly, they're not saying that the policy is shifting. They're under enormous pressure. Everywhere they go, they're being protested. Lloyd Austin yesterday in the Senate was protested heavily by Code Pink.
With Undersecretary of Defense Mike McCord, the department's comptroller.
Case stands at ease until the Capitol Police restore order.
First, even as our budget request.
The committee stands at recess until the Capitol Police can restore order.
Enough is enough. How many children have to die? How many children have to die for you to be satisfied? Enough killing my people. Enough.
I want to address what the protesters raised earlier. Is
Senator
Israel
Tom
committing
Cotton.
genocide in Gaza?
We don't have any evidence of genocide being created.
So that's a no. Israel's not committing genocide in Gaza.
We don't have evidence of that, to
Thank
my
you.
knowledge. Yeah. Also glad to be.
So, huge credit to Code Pink for actually eliciting that question from neoconservative Republican Senator Tom Cotton, himself a huge recipient of donations from Zionist billionaires like Paul Singer. Is there a genocide taking place in Gaza? And Lloyd Austin, preserving his future seat on Raytheon's board, which they've been probably holding for him since he last held it, said, we've seen no evidence. How can you say you've seen no evidence? I mean, I guess he did disappear for a while without telling even others in the Biden administration. So maybe he's not really paying that close attention. But that was another revealing display from the Biden administration. And it's getting under their skin. These protests are getting under their skin. They're deploying their lackeys like professional centrist Jonathan Chait. He's sort of the professional left puncher of the new Democrats that emerged under Bill Clinton and still persist. Left-wing authoritarians are shutting down the Democratic Party. This is Jonathan Chait in New York Magazine. Liberals would justifiably freak out if the right was doing this to Biden. That was authoritarian protest right there.
Yeah. So good liberals just shut up and accept genocide. That's what Jonathan Chait is saying. He, by the way, was a prominent member of the Blumenthal cult, huge Trump Russia conspiracy theorist. He wrote that cover story about how, for New York Magazine, about how Trump was likely a Russian asset since 1987, featured by Chris Hayes on a show back in the good old Russiagate days. So
yeah,
that's Blumenthal cult membership, Russiagating and outrage at people who dare to stand up to Genocide Joe for his support for the genocide.
There's Jonathan Chait.
There he is. Yes, that's the
unlikely but possible that Trump has been Russian intel asset since 1987. That's journalism in America. It's possible. It's unlikely. And so anyway, it's not authoritarian to force this policy down the throats of the majority of Democratic Party voters who want a ceasefire. It's not authoritarian to have billionaires like Haim Saban basically control Joe Biden's Middle East policy. It's authoritarian for people who have almost no voice in our political system to go to a hearing on Capitol Hill and interrupt and voice their anger at someone who was previously sort of unknown in national security circles and was just a warm seat on Raytheon's board, the defense secretary, Lloyd Austin. That's authoritarian, but it's happening everywhere. I mean, at the giant festival of narcissism at Radio City Hall in New York, where thousands of Democratic donors gathered to hear Stephen Colbert be the parody of his former self and deliver a softball fundraiser interview for Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, along with performances by paid tools like Queen Latifah. The Radio City Hall was basically besieged by protesters. Hillary Clinton was called a super predator to her face as she exited. And this is getting to them. It's a really unique moment in American politics, and it needs to continue whether there's a ceasefire or not.
Let's look at how Antony Blinken is handling all this protest against his policy. He's still trying to make the case that really all this is just Hamas's fault.
Also be, I think, important that so much of the understandable passion, outrage, and anger directed at Israel for the plight of Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
So he has to acknowledge there that there's understandable outrage at Israel, right? For the what he calls the plight of Palestinians in Gaza, which, you know, is a euphemism for mass murder. But watch how he handles it.
Some of that might also be reserved and directed for Hamas. It remains astounding to me that the world is almost deafeningly silent when it comes to Hamas.
Yes, the world is silent on Hamas, right? I mean, yeah. Hamas has so much global support, according to Antony Blinken.
We would not be where we are had they not chosen to engage in one of the most horrific acts of brutality and terrorism on October 7th. And had they then, having done that, not refused these many, many months to get out of the way of civilians, to stop hiding behind them, to put down their arms, to release the hostages, to surrender.
Just
Where's
surrender.
the outrage there?
Just give up.
I mean, he's basically he's endorsing the basic logic of terrorism, which is that if you don't do what we want, we're gonna slaughter all your civilians. That's terrorism right there. So he's endorsing that. And again, like, does he really want anyone to does he think anyone can just believe that history began on October 7th, that Hamas has started all this and nothing happened before all that? There wasn't the longest running military occupation in the world going on October 6th. It's just a complete farce, but that's the best he can do, is just pretend as if basically history began on October 7th when Hamas woke up one day, decided to start a war, because why not?
First of all, he always looks like he's walking away from a car accident. Like, he looks just shell shocked.
Yeah.
More than ever. And he doesn't sound confident there. He's essentially admitting defeat. He's frustrated that the world, and he's referring to, by the world, he's including the global South, that's asserting itself at the ICJ, whether it's South Africa or Nicaragua, or just simply the world that is voting and pushing for these ceasefire resolutions that the U.S. has tried to either water down or obstruct. The U.S. is completely alone. Antony Blinken has presided over the isolation of the United States in a way that none of even Trump's secretaries of state hadn't, and even George Bush's secretaries of state hadn't. And the complete discrediting of what he calls the rules-based order. And as you said, he's still reiterating this hackneyed, disgusting narrative of human shields, when we have the Israeli army itself admitting to using this AI lavender system that was first reported by Yuval Abraham in 972, the Israeli publication, which is AI computer system that generates targets more rapidly than the Israeli military can even approve them or vet them. And the targets are determined. The targeting is determined through a sort of a sub program called Where's Daddy, which ensures that the targets are hit at their most vulnerable point, which guarantees the highest success rate, which is when they're at home with their families, which is why entire families are being wiped off the civilian registry in Gaza. This completely discredits the idea of human shields. It just means that people who happen to maybe are like a plumber or a doctor affiliated with some government ministry somewhere, even just a municipality, maybe they work for the mayor, they're all considered Hamas according to this AI program. And then they're all killed along with their entire family at home. We saw 14 people murdered last night in Rafah in an Israeli airstrike. You look at the images of the dead, it's just a bunch of kids burned, just being burned by the self-proclaimed children of the light. And here's Tony Blinken whining about human shields and complaining that the world should condemn Hamas, and admitting that Israel's doing horrible things at the same time. So if you are Hamas or you're the axis of resistance, you got Tony Blinken right where you want him. He's
the most like choked up, nervous, chuffed maniac I've ever seen. Usually sociopaths have confidence in their rhetoric, in their support for mass murder. He's a little conflicted, but he still spits it out. He gets it out. But yeah, it's just truly sadistic what he's saying.
It's shocking to me too the way the U.S. press has treated Blinken. I mean, compared to other secretaries of state like Colin Powell, Condi Rice. I mean, they were destroyed for the Iraq War. Tony Blinken's still being protected. It's partly because he has relationships with so many members of the press. He comes from their world.
He was an op-ed writer for the New York Times after the Obama administration. He had pretty much a regular column in the New York Times. And that's where he advocated that Trump undo the Obama policy of not sending javelins to Ukraine. So basically, after becoming an op-ed writer, he was lobbying Trump to basically do what Obama wouldn't do. And so he is a member of that sort of that liberal elite class, the media class. He's probably friendly with many people, and that might explain why. I don't know. Is there a worse Secretary of State? I guess Mike Pompeo was pretty horrible. But Blinken, I mean, what has he done? Like, what diplomacy does he do? He's a complete joke. Everything he says is a lie, and he's bad at doing it. He's not even a smooth operator when he lies through his teeth.
Yeah, I mean, Pompeo was a transparent bozo, so it wasn't a shock that he would get diverted from. He would just be completely diverted from anything remotely resembling diplomacy into culture war tirades against the 1619 Project. And the ridiculous presentations about a clean internet, clean from Chinese influence. It wasn't a surprise that the Koch brothers tool from Wichita, Kansas was going to behave like that. But Tony Blinken what he's doing is he's discrediting the liberal intelligentsia on the world stage. And there's nothing left after that. He is the deep state. He is the establishment. He comes from the Ivy Leagues. He was an opinion writer at Harvard University. He used to posture around as a liberal Zionist, denouncing Menachem Begin at his school paper. And now he is just a symbol of American decline. And there's no hiding it. And corruption, just complete corruption. When he leaves, he will go back into the private sector and make tons of money off this genocide and off the Ukraine proxy war through something like West Exec Advisors. And
big credit to those people who've been camping outside his mansion in Maryland, right? Or wherever it is in Virginia. There's been a camera going on, which you've been to, right?
Yeah. I'm going to put up video of it. I did shoot some video outside Kibbutz Blinken, which has been maintained by some really brave Palestine solidarity activists who'd been there day and night in the mud, it's an amazing scene because they camped out right in front of a $40 million mansion, which is owned by a mysterious LLC directly across from Blinken's mansion on Chainbridge Road. So, when I got there, it was just mud. They were, braving some pretty rough conditions. And these are Palestinians, including Palestinians who have survived the Nakba. Some of them are refugees. And every time a car goes in or out, they douse fake blood around the car. And there's nothing that Blinken and his security team can do to dislodge them. They just held an iftar dinner outside Blinken's house, and they're helping man the tents, which have remained since the suicide/extreme protest of Air Force Airman Aaron Bushnell outside the Israeli embassy. The Israeli embassy is itself working with a thug squad modeled after the thug squads that are blocking aid to the Gaza Strip to try to dislodge these protesters, and they can't do it. So it's, the vice of protest, of popular outrage, of international outrage is tightening directly and physically around Tony Blinken to the point where he just can't go anywhere without seeing it.